This world is not what you think it is.
Kill the programming.
This world is not what you think it is.
Moon landings. Why the big lie about it? Obviously, people say the Americans wanted to beat the Russians, but why the big lie? Because I speak to people who say we're living in a glass dome. I speak to people who say the world's round, the world's flat. I'm not asked. My question is, but why the lie? They're hiding something. That's the way I see it, because I've never seen all this with my own eyes. I would love to go up to space, and even if there is space or the universe, because I've watched videos and I've spoken to people who've tried to send up cameras and it hits a roof, like the Truman Show kind of thing. And I could be crazy. I think we're all fucking crazy. But the moon landings, if you actually look at and break it down and how fake it is and the machinery they're used, the camera's moving, the flag's moving, the boot's not even the same.
Do you know who filmed it?
Who?
Stanley Kubrick. Remember, a great movie, which is timeless, came out in 1968, a year before the moon landing. 2001, A Space Odyssey. Now, if you go watch that movie, you'd be, no freaking way was that made in 1968. It looks like it could have been made in 2000. Even later. I mean, only the haircuts would maybe give it away and stuff. But other than that, it's all in space, and it all, it's incredible. Stanley Kubrick, a Jew, who, by the way, his last movie, Eyes Wide Shut, I don't know if you know this, but that's his last movie. Now, you've seen Eyes Wide Shut.
Tom Cruise?
Yes, and Nicole Kidman.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was filmed in a Rothschild's mansion here in this country, by the way. So it is, like, true to Stanley's form, totally authentic. The actors in Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick, who directed that, they had to do a mini boot camp. You can't teach actors to, like, march and do the kind of stuff that we Marines do. No way. You ain't gonna show up on set and, like, just march. It took us hundreds and hundreds of hours to get to the point where we're not like some gaggle fuck. Anyway, in Eyes Wide Shut, you'll appreciate this. The audience will appreciate this if they don't know. Stanley Kubrick had a deal like no other producer director had. Nobody. Not George Lucas. Nobody. He had full editorial control over his movies. Total. Now, it's the studios that have that control. With every other producer director, literally, all of them. The studios rule Hollywood, which are all owned by Jews. There's a book, An Empire of Our Own. It talks about the Jewish roots of Hollywood. Anyway, Stanley Kubrick, because he was the best, absolute best, he had full editorial control. Now, he was always a smoker, but he had sort of, stopped smoking, but he always smoked Marlboros. And he was chain smoking in the process of completing the shooting for Eyes Wide Shut. Now, for those who haven't seen the movie, it's a stunning movie. The cinematography of the movie, the shots of the ceremony of the robed, masked people with these supermodels disrobing and whatnot. I mean, the whole thing is really authentic. And if anybody would have known, Stanley would have known, like, how the uber rich act and what they do. Stanley, when he finished the movie, which was 1999, he went to the studio to air the final cut, his cut of the film. And he went with his assistant. Now, he left his assistant. His assistant wasn't allowed to go into the studio, the bigwig, so it's just Stanley and the heads of the studio. The assistant sat outside. Stanley went in and they watched the movie. And what the assistant said was that he heard nothing but yelling. Like, yelling. Stanley yelling. And clearly the studio heads were telling him something he was not happy with. And after all the shouting and whatnot, he came out. He didn't say a word to his assistant. His assistant didn't ask. They went home. Stanley ended up dead within, I believe, a week or two after that. So the movie aired after he had died. The thing was, it's come to light that the final cut of the movie, which clearly the studio heads did not approve, the final cut, they took out 24 minutes of that film. There's 24 minutes of that film that Stanley Kubrick had supplied to them, but they cut it out. Now, if you go back and watch the movie, that is a satanic sexual ceremony. Look at the red robe. Look at the colors of the robes. Look at the mantelpiece. Look at the use of the smoke. This is all satanic. I am absolutely sure that the 24 minutes that they killed Stanley over and didn't allow to be aired, which I would love to see, would have had, I believe it would have had the child sacrifice elements, something, and tying it into our leaders. Because this is the way they run the show. This is why all of our politicians are errand boys, bootlickers for the Jewish state of Israel. Otherwise, how do we explain it? How can we possibly explain it? And I have said this publicly many times over. Now, you need to, have you ever read The Art of War by Sun Tzu?
Yeah.
You can read that in a day. I highly recommend it. You need to understand your enemy. You know, the very basic concepts of if you're going to take on an enemy, if you're fighting against some opposing force, you must understand your enemy inside out and backwards. So you must get into their mind, you must understand their resources, everything. I've done this with the powers that be. You know, you have to get into the mind of a psychopath, of a sociopath, of a narcissist. You need to take that to a next level into the spiritual realm of a socio-psychopath. And so that's not something that most people would even think to do or entertain. But in order to understand and fight an enemy, you need to put yourself in that position. You need to think about things from their perspective.
What about the fake UFO invasion they're planning, apparently?
I've been saying that for years. Well, we know anti-gravity technology exists. This is where we're getting into Antarctica and back to that. So they all have this treaty saying not to go there because apparently we respect nature so much. Bit strange because we're kind of raping the rest of the planet, right? But apparently we care that much. That doesn't make sense. If you look at it logically, I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense. I don't believe in the virtuous. Okay, they want the resources. Okay. Yep. Yeah, the water, actually. The water will fucking provide us like pure water, like really pure water. So there's a lot of value there. But all of the nations have signed on to this Antarctic thing. If you try and sail down to Antarctica, you will be received by, the top like kind of military capacity vessels, and you may never come back. Some people apparently disappear, but they all appear to agree on this. If you go back to Admiral Byrd's, have you ever come across Admiral Byrd's secret diary? Mm-mm. Oh, you'd be fascinated by that. Admiral Byrd was like Charles Lindbergh. He was an aviator, a pilot. Charles Lindbergh, who flew across the Atlantic, right? The first transatlantic flight was Charles Lindbergh. It was actually him and Admiral Byrd who were like sort of competing to be the first one to do it. And Admiral Byrd was almost first, but he ended up not being, and Lindbergh was. But Admiral Byrd was the most highly decorated military man at that time in history. Okay? He was of the highest moral character. He had the fortitude, the strength, the skills, the leadership capacity, all of it. He also served during World War II. And after World War II, this is a known fact, Adolf Hitler and the National Socialists had expeditions to Antarctica. In fact, they spent a lot on expeditions to Antarctica, like a lot. Like there was clearly some sort of fascination with Antarctica. And so when we took over Germany, all of the records, which the Germans were methodical about record keeping, by the way, they have no records of 6 million Jews, all this, none, zip. So they got all the records and the top secret stuff, which would have included the Antarctic expeditions that the National Socialists had sent down there, which they heavily invested in, 2 years later, 1947, was the largest expedition in the history of the world, which Admiral Byrd was the commander of. So he was sent as the commander for the biggest expedition in history. They had an aircraft carrier, they had battleships, destroyers, supply ships, planes. The planes were kitted out in such a way that they had to have extra fuel, and they were heavy planes. So the aircraft carriers had to go at full speed, like 30 knots, into the wind, just to hope that they could get this thing off the ground with all the extra fuel to be able to fly over Antarctica and map it, because of what they found in so-called Nazi Germany, National Socialist Germany. Here's what's happened. Here's what happened according to the diary. Admiral Byrd, when he came back and gave this report to the Pentagon, that's who he answered to, the Pentagon. They told him, after he spilled the beans, to shut his fucking mouth and to never mention anything ever again about it to anybody. Now, when I tell you what the story is, the brief version of the story, you'll understand why this was a heavy burden on him. Okay? So he didn't say anything, but he did write into his diary, which was found by either his son or grandson, about 10 years after he died, right? So, or a few years after he died. What the diary says is this. They get down to Antarctica, the planes take off, they all have their trajectories. He is the lead pilot, and he has a co-pilot. They fly on these azimuths, these trajectories, and he's got a log, which the physical log, which he maintained. So like every 15 minutes, he would have radio contact. Everything is fine. And if there was anything unusual, then he would note it in the log, right? So everything is going fine. They're flying, altitude check, everything flying. Then he sees something and he notes it, starting to see some discoloration in the ice. Keep in mind, it should be perfectly white down there. Discoloration would denote some sort of organic matter or possible meltage or whatever. He keeps going. Next thing, he starts to see some green, which makes no fucking sense at all. Not based on what we're told. Not zip. He then, and this is all like while this is happening, he then sees what appears to be an elephant, but he bends around, does a banking turn to come in closer and lower his altitude, and he corrects, it's a mammoth. It's fucking like a mammoth. And he keeps going, and now he sees mountains and a forest. And that's where the plane starts to act wonky and the instruments start to not work correctly. And he notes it. And then he sees aircraft alongside him. Flying saucers aircraft. And the controls of the plane are basically like they go completely. The instruments are all gone and his radio contact is stopped. All of this is noted. I'm going a little bit out of sequence here, but this is what happens. The plane and the sound is gone, like the sound from the wind, and that's gone. Like the instruments don't work. The plane is no longer in his control. The sound and the wind is all gone, and yet they're moving at a fast pace. And there's these vessels. And over the radio then comes a message. Admiral Byrd, do not worry. We have taken control of your plane. And they say, we will be landing you in 7 minutes. Okay. So, what can I do? So they go with the flow, and the plane then literally, like, it's like in an elevator shaft, like it literally lowers to ground and just a little bump, when it touches the ground. And then the aircraft, they've landed around him, and guess what? They have markings on them. They have markings. You know what the marking is? A swastika. A fucking swastika. This is freaking swastika on there, right? By the way, I have a swastika tattooed on my body here and here. That symbol is a beautiful
Peace.
symbol.
Sign of peace, is it not?
Yes.
Is it Buddhism?
Yeah, yes, Hinduism, Buddhism, and all over Asia you'll find them. It's a beautiful symbol. That's why I picked it as well. Anyway, there's a swastika emblems on the flying saucers, right? The beings in the vessels step out, and he notes what they look like. They're blonde, blue-eyed, and they're very tall. They command him to exit the airplane and open up the hatch to make sure of what's in it. And then they tell him, we're going to take you to the city. It's then put on a platform that like travels at this fast pace towards a city that he describes as like a crystal city with a light unlike any light he's ever seen. And also he mentions before that the sun, he couldn't see the sun anymore, and that the light had changed. But this also is in concert with the city now that's like a crystal city unlike anything he's ever seen, and it's nothing like anything he's ever seen. They take him, they identify themselves as the Ariani. The Ariani, blonde hair, blue eyes. They then say that they tell him to, when they get to the border of the city, that they leave his co-pilot at the plane, right? So he's having to sit there, and then Admiral Byrd is taken, and they say, you have been chosen because of your honorable character to meet the master. Okay, so Admiral Byrd is now being taken by the Ariani, who have a swastika, their blonde hair, blue eyes, and they're a bit tall, and they're being taken to the master. They take him into the city, and they provide him some drink of likes he's never had. He said it was amazing. Whatever they gave him, this drink was incredible. And the city was just like, the light emanated from the walls, and it was like, you could, where's the source? It just like comes from the frickin' walls. And they take him to like a lobby type office or whatever, and they tell him the master will be with you in a moment. And then sure enough, he is summoned into a room, and there's a big like board table in a beautiful, like amazing room, and the master says, please have a seat. And here's what the master says to him. He says, and Admiral Byrd describes him as clearly a being of wisdom, a man of wisdom, like, of age, but youthful at the same time. The master proceeds to tell him that they are the Ariani, and that they're part of a civilization that is many thousands of years in advance of humanity, and that they live within the hollow earth, as he's been taken, because it goes down, the city goes down into the internal regions of this flat earth, and that he has been brought here because although the policy of the Ariani, which by the way he witnesses other beings, like not just the Ariani, like there's other ones that seem sort of more primitive or more whatever, reptilian, or like this, like that stuff does exist here. And he says that he was brought here because of his noble character, and because that they had tried in their flugel rods, they're called, these UFO things, the flugel rods, they had tried to go and contact our leaders, but every time they had tried, they had been shot at aggressively by our aircraft, and therefore they didn't weren't able to make contact, so he was being summoned to be the conduit to send a message to his bosses, the Pentagon. And basically the message was this: we have a hands-off policy. We have our dominion, you have yours. You have the terrestrial realm, we have this. We leave you be. At least the Ariani, although that doesn't explain some of the, the reptilians or the Greys and all this other evidence we see. He says, but the policy had to change in 1945 because, and I've been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when they used nukes, that was a problem. That was a problem. Now you can imagine if they lived millions of light years away, it wouldn't be a big deal, would it? But if they live on the same dominion as us, yeah, maybe those nukes might be a bit of a problem, right? Like for them. So that was why he was being summoned, to take back a message and to say that this is something that humanity should not be playing with, and that there was a way to avoid the darker consequences of what could happen. Samson option Israel, by the way, been warning humanity forever. And that was the point. And it was, again, his moral character and his nobility that led to him being chosen, and that his job was to now take this message back. And with that, very cordially, they ended the meeting, and he was rushed at a pace to so he wasn't gone too long. They did this fairly quickly, because how are you going to explain like the extra several hours that you couldn't have possibly been in the air, right? He goes back, he says nothing to anybody. They bring him back in the plane. They're alongside him, and they say, we're going to release control of the plane. You're going to take control back. And sure enough, they do that. He sinks a bit, and then the controls work, the plane, the wind, and everything, and he flies back. He basically just tells his co-pilot everything's okay. He doesn't tell him anything more than that. And they go back, and eventually they sail back to Washington, D.C. and to the Pentagon, and that's where he reports, and that's where they tell him not to say a fucking word. So that might explain why all the nations of the world agree on Antarctica, which isn't an island at all. It is an ice wall.
Around the Earth?
Yes, it's an ice wall. So we don't live in a ball. We live in a flat dominion. Antarctica surrounds us, and there are channels. And if you look at the older maps, you have Lemuria, and
is there places beyond Antarctica?
Yes.
Because I had a flat earther on, he says it was all places beyond. This is where extra life is, and like ET kind of extraterrestrial kind of.
Yeah.
And it might all sound far-fetched. We both understand it might be crazy, and we could be fucking crazy. I don't know, because I've never seen it with my own eyes, but I'm open to it. I'm open to the ideas, because I've seen some wicked stuff in this planet that has been debunked to be true. So there can also be beautiful things, and people who have the answers. Maybe we are kind of the avatars. Maybe we're the aliens. Maybe we're in a simulator. There's many possibilities. There's many theories out there that what we could actually be in. But it just doesn't feel real to me. Something's amiss.
And talk about the things that interested us most, in particular the things that occurred on and about the moon. We will use a number of films and slides which most of you have already seen, with the intent of pointing out some of the things that we observed on the spot, which may not be obvious to those of you who are looking at them here from the surface of Earth.
Under the Masonic moon, plans were made by the bankers in the back room. Get the president out of the way and hire Stanley Kubrick. Under the Masonic moon, under the Masonic moon, everyone hoped that the boys would come home soon. One more day and they'll drop from the plane and splash into the ocean. Under the Masonic moon, Werner von Braun and his conspirators got a free ride to the States. They turned Nazi into NASA, they just couldn't wait. Under the Masonic moon, under the Masonic moon, plans were made by the bankers in the back room. The owl sees into the night and the secret will never be told. Under the Masonic moon, under the Masonic moon, plans were made by the bankers in the back room. The owl sees into the night and the secret will never be told.
99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Red, good.
The owl sees into the night and the secret will never be told.
Okay, 30 seconds. 308 your number. Take coming through 1,500 feet, and H-dot looks good. Right away, Houston.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.